Hey everyone, you're listening to the Ask BP podcast, and today we're talking about how to use the 2% rule when evaluating rental properties. Stay tuned.
You're listening to another BiggerPockets Ask BP podcast, where you'll hear short, direct answers to your biggest real estate questions. Submit your question today on Facebook, Twitter, or the BiggerPockets forums by using hashtag AskBP. And don't forget to pick up your copy of The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Real Estate Investing and other great content when you sign up for your free account at BiggerPockets.com. With that, let's get to the show.
All right, today's question comes from Charles from Bakersfield, California. And he asks, is anyone actually achieving the 2% rule? Is this a realistic goal? So Charles, I understand your frustration with the 2% rule, and I want to definitely help you answer that question and see how to use that as an investor from California or anywhere else where the 2% rule might seem unrealistic. But before we get to that, I want to explain exactly what the 2% rule is. The 2% rule basically states that for a property to have satisfactory cash flow for a cash flow investor, that the gross monthly rent should be equal to 2% of the purchase price. In other words, if I were to purchase a $50,000 property, I'd expect that property to rent for $1,000 a month. $1,000 is 2% of the $50,000 purchase price. Now, this measure is a pretty good one for a cash flow investor. You might think of the types of areas where properties like this exist as the Midwest or the Deep South or perhaps rural America. These are typically places where property values have remained fairly stagnant over a very long period of time. If you're buying rental properties in those places, you're most likely looking for cash flow and not necessarily hoping that $50,000 property is going to turn into a $100,000 property. Of the rules of thumb that real estate investors on BiggerPockets tend to use, this one seems to frustrate the most people. There just really aren't 2% rule properties in areas like yours, right between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Those 2% rule properties, again, they tend to be in those places out in the Midwest or the Deep South, or kind of more rural areas where, again, investors aren't expecting the property values to go up a lot over time. So the 2% rule should really be thought of as a rule of thumb when you're looking strictly for cash flow. Now, it's possible to cash flow on properties that don't meet the 2% rule. You're just probably not going to cash flow quite as much in the short to medium term as investors that are investing in properties that do meet the 2% rule. For example, I live and invest here in Denver, Colorado. There are no properties that I know of in the immediate area around Denver that meet the 2% rule. For example, my duplex here in Denver costs about $240,000 and rents for about $2,400 per month. I'd assume that I could get that if I moved out and was no longer a tenant. That property is at the 1% rule. I know that I can cash flow at that 1% mark here in Denver, Colorado. Not quite as much as if I got a 2% rule property, but I do know that I'm stably bringing in income net of all my expenses, including CapEx and potential vacancies and all that stuff. So while I cash flow there, my overall return, I'm hoping, will also be impacted by appreciation. I expect this property to go up in value over the next 30 years, as I would most properties here in Denver, Colorado. I may not have that same expectation for a property in Memphis, Tennessee, or Milwaukee, areas that I don't know very much about. So Charles, in answer to your question, folks are achieving this 2% rule. It is realistic, just perhaps not in Bakersfield, California. In that case, if you're hoping to invest in Bakersfield, California, look for properties that will cash flow, but also expect appreciation. And that's going to be part of your investing plan if you're an investor in that area. Otherwise, you wouldn't be investing in that area because you could get better cash flow out in the Midwest. So keep in mind that the 2% rule is a rule of thumb that is a pretty good one for lower income areas with lower property values and higher price to rent ratios. Often, the investors that are using the 2% rule aren't expecting long-term appreciation and aren't planning for that. Investors that disregard that and invest in up-and-coming cities generally do have an expectation of long-term appreciation. Both approaches are valid, although the appreciation factor is perhaps less under your control than the cash flow factor is for investors out in the Midwest. Alrighty, everybody, now it's time for our success quote of the day. Today's success quote comes from Warren Buffett, and he says, "Price is what you pay, value is what you get." I think this is directly relevant to our discussion today, as we just discussed how properties in very different regions of the country are priced very differently and produce different types of value for investors. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's show and learned something, and if you did, please give me a thumbs up if you're watching here on YouTube, or leave a comment in the comment section there on BiggerPockets. Remember, in pursuit of your goals, don't just learn, but take action. For the Ask BP podcast, this is Scott Trench, signing off.
You've just heard another episode of the BiggerPockets Ask BP podcast. Submit your question today on Facebook, Twitter, or the BiggerPockets forum by using hashtag AskBP. And for more incredible real estate investing tools and education, including a free download of our book, The Ultimate Beginner's Guide to Real Estate Investing, head over to BiggerPockets.com and sign up for your free account today. We'll see you on the next show.